Nearly 8 weeks, 54 days, and still nothing. No suspect named, no motive officially confirmed, no Nancy. Her daughter, Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie, finally broke her silence this week in an emotional two-part interview that left millions of viewers in tears. What she revealed shifts the entire picture of this investigation. Her guilt, her faith, her fear, and the one thing she said she heard directly from God about where her mother is now. Meanwhile, a 20 to 24 person joint task force of FBI agents and sheriff's deputies continues working this case in shifts. DNA evidence sits inside a private lab in Florida, still being analyzed. The suspect, armed, masked, carrying a specific backpack, has never been identified, and a $1.1 million combined reward sits unclaimed. This is the Nancy Guthrie disappearance. 2 months in, every unanswered question still burning. If this case matters to you, subscribe to the True Crime Report right now, because when this breaks, you are going to want to be here. Before we get to what Savannah revealed this week, we need to understand the foundation, because this case has so many moving parts that it is easy to lose the thread. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, was last seen on the evening of January 31st. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, dropped her off at her Catalina Foothills home in Tucson at approximately 9:50 that night after a family dinner. That was the last confirmed sighting of Nancy by anyone who knew her. The following morning, she failed to appear for a scheduled live stream of a church service she attended regularly. A member of her church reached out to the family. Her daughter Annie and Tommaso went to check on her around 11 a.m. What they found when they arrived would launch one of the highest profile missing persons investigations in recent American history. Bloodstains were found at or near the entrance of Nancy's home, and forensic testing later confirmed that DNA from that blood belonged to Nancy herself. The back doors of the house were propped open. Her phone was still inside, her purse, her shoes. The doorbell camera had been ripped off. Around noon, the family called 911. From the very early moments, Annie and her husband Tommaso were telling responding officers that this was not a case where someone wandered off. Nancy was in tremendous pain. Her back was very bad. On a good day, she could walk down to the mailbox, but most days, not. There was no wandering off. What investigators found when they processed the scene confirmed the family's instinct. Personal items had been left behind. A doorbell security camera had been removed. And given Nancy's limited mobility and the absence of any indication she had left voluntarily, investigators quickly assessed that she had been taken against her will. By February 2nd, the case had formally shifted from a search operation to a criminal investigation. Sheriff Chris Nanos stated that evidence recovered from Nancy's residence indicated a crime had taken place inside the home, leading investigators to treat it as a crime scene and involve homicide investigators. Then the ransom notes arrived. Within 72 hours of Nancy's disappearance being reported, ransom demands began arriving at media outlets. Multiple notes were sent to entertainment outlets, to local Tucson television stations, to the family directly. They demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin. They set deadlines. They escalated. But here is the critical detail that the original script got wrong, and it matters. Savannah told Hoda Kotb directly, "There are a lot of different notes, I think, that came. And I think most of them, it's my understanding, are not real." Most not real. However, Savannah said she believed 2 of the messages were legitimate. 2 notes that the family responded to publicly with video statements demanding proof of life. This distinction is significant. Law enforcement has never officially confirmed that any of the notes were definitively authenticated. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI said in February that they were investigating multiple ransom notes, but never confirmed whether any were believed to be from the people behind Nancy's disappearance. What we do know is this: the family put out those video responses. The videos said the family was ready to talk and demanded proof that their mother was still alive. Savannah, Annie, and their brother Cameron appeared together, raw, unguarded, pleading. They said they would pay. They asked for a sign that Nancy was alive. But the Guthries never received any assurance that the purported notes were genuine, and they never received proof of life. Former federal agents familiar with kidnapping protocol note that without confirmed proof of life, the FBI typically advises families against making payment. The reasoning is precise. A ransom paid without life confirmation does not guarantee safety and may simply fund further criminal enterprise. The investigation protocol in those cases shifts, not from urgency, but from direction. The family never paid. Savannah addressed the ransom notes and said a person that would send a fake ransom note really has to look deeply at themselves to a family in pain. Those words carry enormous weight because what Savannah was describing in that moment was not just moral outrage at fraud. She was describing the impossible position her family was placed in, trying to determine, with their mother's life potentially on the line, which notes were real and which were exploitation. Now to the DNA, because this is where the investigation currently sits, and it is where its most consequential developments are still unfolding. Here is what is officially confirmed. Early in the investigation, authorities shared that both mixed and partial DNA had been found inside Nancy Guthrie's home. This DNA did not match Nancy, her family, or anyone who worked in her home. Sheriff Chris Nano said at the time, "We believe that we may have some DNA there that may be our suspect, but we won't know that until that DNA is separated, sorted out, maybe admitted to CODIS, maybe through genetic genealogy." That DNA found at the Tucson property is still being analyzed. Nothing in the investigation has produced any matches in CODIS, the FBI-managed combined DNA index system, a national database holding more than 19 million offender profiles. Investigators are looking into other genetic genealogy options to check for matches with the DNA evidence. The sheriff noted that CODIS is just one of several available databases. Separately, other gloves found in the area are still being tested at a private lab in Florida. Note, the gloves found approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home, the ones that initially generated significant attention because they appeared to match those worn by the suspect in doorbell camera footage, have already been traced by DNA to a local restaurant worker who is not part of the investigation. So what is the challenge with the DNA that was actually recovered inside the home? The answer lies in what investigators call a complex mixture. When forensic scientists recover DNA from a crime scene, the ideal sample comes from a single contributor, clean, full, sequence able. But in a lived-in residential space, surfaces accumulate biological material from everyone who has ever touched them: family members, housekeepers, repair workers, visitors. By the time a forensic team swabs that surface, they may be working with a genetic mixture of multiple contributors, varying proportions, and degraded material. Separating those contributions into individual profiles, a process called deconvolution, is one of the most technically demanding challenges in modern forensic science. Forensic experts note that the difficulty increases sharply when there are multiple contributors and when the suspect represents only a small fraction of the overall sample. According to NBC News, authorities plan to use investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, to help identify a suspect. IgG is a process that turns unidentified DNA evidence into a digitized DNA profile and then uses genealogical databases to trace that profile to a specific individual through family connections. This is the same methodology that identified the Golden State Killer in 2018 and has since been applied to dozens of cold cases across the country. The technology has advanced significantly in the years since, with researchers now able to work from far smaller and more degraded samples than was previously possible. The reason the sheriff publicly referenced a potential timeline of up to a year for DNA analysis is not incompetence. It is technical reality. Complex mixture deconvolution under current laboratory protocols takes time. The engagement of a private lab, one reportedly using advanced processing methods, is an attempt to compress that timeline without sacrificing accuracy. There is one element of the physical evidence in this case that has not received enough attention, and that is the suspect himself. Doorbell camera images recovered by investigators showed an armed, masked man outside Nancy's home the morning of her disappearance. The man wore a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hike pack backpack. The FBI released a description of the suspect as approximately 5'9" to 5'10" tall with an average build. The FBI also noted the suspect's gun holster had some unique characteristics that investigators were actively pursuing. In the weeks following Nancy's disappearance, investigators visited gun shops in the Tucson area, specifically looking into the distinctive holster visible in the footage. Think about what that tells us. A holster, distinctive enough that trained federal agents believe it can be traced. A specific backpack model, not generic, not unidentifiable, but a named purchasable product. An average build male between 5'9" and 5'10". These are not vague descriptions. These are characteristics that, combined with DNA results, could rapidly narrow a suspect pool. Investigators are also looking into a theory that the masked person visible outside was waiting on the exterior to help an accomplice bring Nancy out through the front door, suggesting this may not have been a one-person operation. The FBI has returned to the neighborhood to ask residents about former neighbors who moved out shortly before Nancy's disappearance. Agents have also asked residents to provide names of construction workers and contractors working on nearby homes under construction. This is behavioral investigation running parallel to forensic analysis. When federal agents revisit a neighborhood weeks into a case to ask about construction workers and recently departed neighbors, they are following a specific thread. They believe someone in that community, either directly or tangentially, may have information that connects to what happened on the night of January 31st. Investigators have also been asking neighbors specifically about January 11th, nearly 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. Authorities have not publicly explained why that date is significant. January 11th, 3 weeks before the abduction, something happened or was observed on that date that investigators believe is connected to what happened to Nancy. Whether it was a surveillance visit, a test run, or some form of pre-operational reconnaissance, law enforcement has identified it as a key timeline marker. Now we get to the part of this story that is hardest to cover and the most important. Savannah Guthrie sat down with Hoda Kotb for a two-part interview that aired March 26th and 27th. It was her first public interview since her mother disappeared, and it was, by any measure, one of the most emotionally raw appearances by a major television journalist in recent memory. She told Hoda, "I imagine her terror, and it is unthinkable, but those thoughts demand to be thought, and I will not hide my face." She described waking up every night in the dark, thinking about what her mother experienced. "I wake up every night in the middle of the night, every night, and in the darkness, I imagine her terror." Then came the moment that stopped the country. Savannah, whose Christian faith she has written about and discussed publicly throughout her career, shared something she had not said publicly before. She shared that she heard God speak to her and that he told her Nancy was with him now. It was, according to reporting on the interview, her first time explicitly and openly weighing the awful possibility that her mother may no longer be alive. She did not present this as confirmation. She presented it as faith in the most fragile and honest form. A person who does not know, but who heard something in the silence that gave her both devastation and a strange, terrible peace. In an earlier video message, Savannah had already publicly acknowledged the possibility. "We still believe in a miracle. We also know that she may be lost. She may already be gone." Both of those things, hope and grief, existing simultaneously. That is the emotional reality of a case with no resolution. You cannot grieve because there is no confirmation. You cannot celebrate because there is no return. You exist in a liminal space that the human mind was not designed to sustain for months at a time. Savannah also addressed the speculation, described by some online as cruel, that someone in the Guthrie family may have been involved in Nancy's disappearance. She called such suggestions unbearable. She said, "It piles pain upon pain. There are no words. I don't understand. No one took better care of my mom than my sister and brother-in-law." And then she turned the guilt inward, toward herself. Savannah sobbed as she considered whether her status and wealth may have had something to do with her mother's abduction. "I don't know that it's because she's my mom and somebody thought, that lady has money, we could make a quick buck. That would make sense, but we don't know, which is too much to bear. To think that I brought this to her bedside, that it's because of me." She said directly to her mother, "I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm so sorry." That moment, a 54-year-old woman, one of the most recognized faces in American morning television, collapsing under the weight of the thought that her career may have made her mother a target, is something that is genuinely difficult to process as a viewer. It is the kind of guilt that has no rational resolution. Even if it is entirely unfounded, even if Nancy was targeted for completely unrelated reasons, Savannah will carry that question for the rest of her life. Let's talk about the investigation structure, because this is something that has not been widely covered, and it matters. According to CNN, there is a 20 to 24 person task force dedicated to this investigation. Approximately half the personnel are from the sheriff's office, and the other half from the FBI. The FBI's Phoenix division has a substantial office in Tucson and has managed the Guthrie case from the beginning and continues to do so. This is not a case that has been quietly shelved. The sheriff's office confirmed to CNN this remains an active investigation, and investigators are focusing on evidence analysis, including DNA and digital. Sheriff Nanos told NBC that investigators believe they are definitely closer to identifying a suspect or suspects. He said the dedicated team from his department's homicide unit is working with the FBI and investigating the case under the presumption that Nancy Guthrie is still alive. They are continuing to pursue thousands of leads. Nanos also told NBC Nightly News that investigators believe they know why Nancy's home was targeted and didn't rule out the possibility that the kidnapper could strike again, calling it a potential danger to the public. That statement, "could strike again," deserves attention. It tells us something specific about what investigators believe they are dealing with. This was not a crime of passion or proximity. This was not a family dispute or a confused individual. The person who entered Nancy Guthrie's home on the night of January 31st was, in the assessment of law enforcement, someone capable of doing this again. Someone whose operational pattern suggests either practice, preparation, or a willingness to repeat. The public has submitted more than 30,000 tips so far in connection with this case. 30,000 tips. That is an extraordinary volume. And yet, no arrest. No named suspect, no confirmed motive. What that tells experienced investigators is that the answer likely does not lie in the general public's awareness. It lies in a smaller circle, a specific community, someone who knows something specific and either does not realize they know it or has not yet found the courage to come forward. The Guthrie family issued a statement on March 21st asking for renewed attention from the community. They said, "No detail is too small. It may be the key." They specifically asked people to review security camera footage, text messages, and personal notes. They urged people to focus especially on the key timeline dates, January 31st, the early morning hours of February 1st, and the late evening of January 11th. January 11th appears again, 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. Whatever happened on that date, both law enforcement and the family believe someone in the Tucson area saw something. There is a broader dimension to this case that rarely gets examined. What it reveals about the vulnerability of the elderly, and specifically about how residential abductions involving ransom demands targeting wealthy families operate. This type of crime, a targeted, planned abduction of an elderly relative of a public figure conducted in a residential neighborhood with ransom demands sent to media outlets, is uncommon in the United States. Former federal agents with kidnapping case experience note that when ransom communications are directed at media rather than the family privately, It creates a specific dynamic. Law enforcement becomes involved immediately, publicly, and at scale. That choice, if it was deliberate, is puzzling from a purely operational standpoint. Sending ransom notes to TMZ and local television stations guarantees federal attention within hours. It generates a media cycle that makes concealment dramatically harder. It announces the crime before the family has even had time to process what happened. Criminologists who study this area suggest two possible interpretations. One, the media targeting was a deliberate strategy, creating noise, generating confusion, perhaps hoping that the scale of the response would overwhelm any single investigative thread. Two, it reflects a lack of sophistication, someone who understood enough to execute a residential abduction, but not enough to understand how American law enforcement responds to media-directed ransom demands. The Bitcoin demand adds a layer of complexity. Cryptocurrency as a ransom vehicle reflects an awareness of digital anonymity tools. But federal agencies have demonstrated repeatedly in high-profile cases that Bitcoin transactions, while pseudonymous, are not invisible. The blockchain is permanent. Every transaction is recorded. With sufficient investigative resources and the right technical tools, cryptocurrency trails can be followed. The FBI has those tools. The question is whether any payment was ever made that would give them a trail to follow. Given that the family never paid, and given that no proof of life was ever received, the cryptocurrency dimension may ultimately be less significant than the physical and genetic evidence left behind at the scene. What remains most promising, most actionable, is the DNA inside that Florida lab, the suspect's specific gun holster, the backpack model, the January 11th timeline that investigators have returned to repeatedly, and the person in this community who knows something and has not yet spoken. Savannah Guthrie is returning to work. She told Hoda Kotb, "I can't not come back. This is my family. I think it's part of my purpose right now." She also said, "I want to smile, and when I do, it will be real. My joy will be my protest. My joy will be my answer." Her return is scheduled for April 6th, right after Easter. Al Roker publicly noted the timing on air, the symbolism of a return after resurrection for a woman whose faith has been the anchor she has returned to throughout this ordeal. She is not going back because this is over. She is not going back because she has found closure or peace. She said herself, "I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'll belong anymore, and I would like to try." That is not a triumphant return. That is a woman choosing forward motion as an act of will, because the alternative is to stop, and stopping feels like abandoning Nancy. She recalled her mother's words after Nancy's husband died. "You have to get up and decide and do. Just decide and do." Savannah watched her mother rebuild a life after devastating loss. She watched Nancy choose resilience when it would have been easier to collapse. Now she is trying to do the same, not because grief has passed, but because she learned from the woman she is still trying to bring home. Savannah also announced a $500,000 donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a gesture that transforms private pain into public purpose, ensuring that some good emerges from this ordeal, regardless of how it ultimately resolves. Meanwhile, the investigation continues. DNA is being processed. Tips are still being reviewed. The task force is still working. The reward still stands. $1 million from the Guthrie family and $100,000 from the FBI for information that leads to Nancy's recovery. 2 months, 54 days, a joint task force of 24 agents and deputies still working in shifts, a DNA sample in a Florida lab that may yet identify the person responsible, a $1.1 million combined reward that nobody has claimed, a family that has been shattered in public, held together by faith and by each other, asking the same question every morning that they went to sleep asking the night before. Where is Nancy? She is 84 years old. She was taken from her home in the dark of night in her pajamas, without her shoes, without her medicine. She is, by her daughter's own description, a woman whose back pain was so severe that on a good day she could walk to the mailbox, and most days not even that. She is someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's neighbor and friend and church companion. The person who took her knows where she is. And somewhere in Tucson or in the broader southern Arizona community, there is at least one other person who knows something, a detail, a date, a name, a vehicle, a conversation that felt strange at the time and has felt stranger since. The family's message is direct. We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder. Our focus is solely on finding her and bringing her home. Savannah Guthrie is going back to work on April 6th. She is going to sit in that anchor chair and look into those cameras and do the job her mother watched her build over decades. She is going to do it while not knowing, while waking up every night in the dark, while carrying guilt that is not hers to carry. She is going to do it because her mother taught her to get up and decide and do. The least the rest of us can do is make sure this case stays visible. Share this video, talk about it, look through your security footage from late January. Think about what you saw. Think about what you heard. This video gave you the complete verified picture of where this investigation stands. The DNA, the task force, the suspect details, the ransom notes, the rewards, and the pain of a family still waiting. If it helped you understand this case more clearly, please share it with someone who cares about this story. Leave a like if you want the True Crime Report to stay on every development as it emerges. And subscribe, because when this case breaks, you will want to be here. I am Sandra. This is the True Crime Report. Thank you for watching.